Hello, my name's Addy Tidy and welcome to another edition of Canal Hunter. This is the third of 3 episodes in which we're following the course of the old Aylsham Navigation. It's a trip which we're undertaking by canoe, starting at Aylsham and running down through the 5 locks as far as Coltishall. It's a video series full of history, but also an awful lot of personal recollections from my time when I paddled the navigation as a teenager. This episode starts at Buxton Mill, an ancient mill that was burned down in a huge fire in 1991 and rebuilt as residential housing. The navigation itself was washed out in a violent storm in August 1912. And this storm took out all of the locks on many of the bridges on the navigation. Just upstream from Buxton Mill, there is a weir stream, and it was at the weir stream where the main breach occurred during the floods. And it's at this weir stream that the 4th portage takes place. So we'll rejoin this trip halfway down the weir stream, just after we've rather unexpectedly shot over a small weir. We appear to have kind of slightly taken a wrong turn here and got into the canoe in the river a bit too soon. See the little weir behind us? Well, I think we should have got in here. Instead, we just went over that. But, well, we live to tell the tale. Onwards and downwards. Buxton Railway Bridge, built in the 1880s to carry the railway up from Wroxham through Aylsham and up to, I think, yes, Mayton Constable. Today we're approaching it from the weir navigation, or from the weir channel, rather than from the river channel. The river channel went off around that way, up towards the mill and the lock. Now, in the time of the 1912 floods, the water was so high in the valley below here, because it was dammed up by the blocked up bridge at Coltishall, that the water reached right up these pillars to the ornamental casting sections at the top. So the valley we're going into now was one enormous great flood, and until the bridge in Coltishall gave way, it had no relief and no let out. The valley just filled and filled and filled. It's not surprising that there was nothing left of this navigation after those tempestuous days of 1912. So we've now come past 4 of the 5 locks on this navigation, and we're on to the Buxton to Horstead Pound. It's actually the longest on the navigation, and it's also the section that I'm most familiar with, which is why I'm leaving Dan to do the paddling. Lovely boy. If you're wondering, and I don't suppose you are, what these white posts are with the red bits on top, what do you reckon they're for, Dan?
Gas.
Absolutely. They are to mark the presence of where the natural gas pipelines run under the canal, or river, or navigation. Call it what you like. You're doing very well, Dan. Keep up the good work.
Well, we've arrived at Mayton Bridge, site of an old Mayton Bridge that fell down, which was made of wood, rebuilt in a classic Aylsham Navigation style, and then this one was the replacement for the 1912 flooded bridge. This was our favourite swimming hole back in the 1970s, so there's just enough water depth in there to dive off from the top of this parapet, but under the bridge there's only about 18 inches of water. Locally, this is known as Mayton Bridges, plural, because there is a second bridge 100 yards to the west, and this is the old 1500 bridge with its little sentry box, which are believed to be toll booths, and it's a very old structure. It's got 2 arches underneath it, and it's believed that one of these courses may have carried the old river channel, the second carried the water coming back from an old moat that went round an older version of Mayton Hall. No one is quite sure what these arches used to carry.
One of the things that hasn't changed is the fact that the river's still used for a water supply for the fruit farms along the side. When I was a teenager, the fruit farms behind these trees were owned by the family of Neves, and I used to go down to these fruit fields each summer and pick strawberries. Commercially, they used to pay, and I remember the boss or the foreman always coming along and having a go at us kids, saying, "Oh, pick 'em clean, pick 'em clean," because we never ever picked as many of the small strawberries off as he wanted. He was a bit of a tyrant. But the odd thing is that it's not just the Neves. They, when I look back on the records of the construction of this waterway, the Neves were one of the prime movers behind this end of it. And not only that, there was the family of the Rivets. They were the farmers, and they were into it as well. And it was a Mr. Rivet who owned the farm, or who owned the farm behind our land, and who rented the field behind our house. So isn't it incredible that you come to somewhere like this, and in 1750 you had a family owning farms around here, and you come along 200 years later, and those families are still on the same plot of land, farming the same things. It's a bit scary, really, especially to someone like me who's moved all over the place all my life. I've got an affection for this area, but I wouldn't ever want to really come back. Anyhow, we will carry on down the pound, heading towards Horstead Mill, see what else we can find. Actually, you know, it wasn't just picking those strawberries. If I absolutely tell the truth, there was one time I was cycling back and I saw this strawberry field absolutely full of the most luscious red strawberries you've ever seen. They hadn't been picked and I couldn't believe it. So I hopped over the fence and I had a good gobble. Unfortunately, I got my comeuppance, because you see, they'd been spraying the strawberries with pesticides and I had the most atrocious stomachache. It taught me to go and steal strawberries from the farmer's field, didn't it, really? Sorry, Mr. Neve. Yeah, it's possible to paddle through here. This is Horstead Common, and you can think this place is a sort of a kid's idyll, you know. In some ways I did quite a swallows and Amazons like existence. I spent my life sailing and canoeing and swimming. My whole life revolved around this river, but it wasn't actually all quite as peaceful and tranquil as you might think. I remember I was fishing down here one day and a gang of local hoodlums came up the river in their boat and promptly tried to set about us and throw our fishing gear into the river. Actually, they really were a nasty bunch of hoodlums. One of them even went on to kill his mother, quite literally. Yeah, even in a picturesque rural little place like Horstead or Coltishall, it's not all perfect, but actually it was a pretty fantastic place to grow up, in the sense of someone who loves the water and loves the river. It's a passion that you might have noticed has never left me. Now, that's Horstead Common. Looks absolutely nothing like it was when I was a teenager. It was just a strip of bare grass with a few boats on. One thing that's very different about this river course 40 years on is the amount it's overgrown. When I was here as a teenager, it was just open banks all the time. The trees were all chopped back, but now they've all overgrown, and sometimes they almost arch all over the channel, turning it into a tunnel. So it has a much more secretive, secluded feel about it than when I was here before. Yeah, not better, not worse, just different. So as we come out of Bream Corner, we're coming into the final reach before Coltishall Bridge. The buildings on my left were, or may still be, Fines the Butchers, but before that there used to be a Maltings and a seed warehouse, and there are some cracking old photos of the wherries which had come up through the Horstead Lock and were moored up alongside the buildings here, waiting to take products on and off. Actually, in the autumn light, when you've got the trees are changing colour, it's one of the prettiest places in the world. Well, not the butchers, you get me. I'm not thinking about the trees here. Now as we approach the weir above Horstead Mill, this is Coltishall Bridge, the one that collapsed in 1912 and the one that caused the roads to be diverted by Mayton Bridge for ages. If you look in to the left and the right of the main span, you can see the old red brickwork of the original bridge. But then in 1912 they built this new concrete structure across the front. That was built big enough to take any amount of rain you could possibly imagine. There you go, some more of the old red abutments from the original Aylsham Navigation Bridge. That section built in 1846, so that's probably in itself a replacement for the original bridge. Right, we're heading just to the left beyond these last of these trees. We're going into the left just beyond the last of these trees. Ahead of you is the remains of Horstead Mill, burnt down in 1963. January 63. Apparently I saw it burning down, but I was only a year and a half old, so I don't remember that at all. You should be able to see the slipway beside the lock. And there is the remains of Horstead Lock. The first to be built, the first to be rebuilt. And the destruction of the canal trapped boats up here. Only the Zulu was pulled over it. The rest of them were left up here to rot. So, for us, the end, strictly speaking, of the Aylsham Navigation, but not quite the end of this trip. So back when I was a kid, there was the lock here and the lock sluices, but there was also a lockkeeper's cottage just in here. It was still standing. Most of its roof was in place. One of those scary sort of places you used to go into. These days, all that's left is a few foundations down here. These days, the area around the Horstead Lock and the Horstead Mill have all been beautifully made into an area of park which is really gorgeous. But back in the 70s, this was a favourite swimming place. They had old wooden gates on these and no locks on them, so it was quite possible to turn the handles at the top and open the sluices and have a solid block of water come jetting through, and then we'd dive off these corners into the jet of water that came through. Looking at it now, I can see that the pool doesn't have much water flowing through it, so it's all silted up, but it was very, very deep. You could hardly reach the bottom. I do remember having the gates left open one night and looking down in the river the next day, and the whole pound all the way up to Buxton was absolutely empty. And on the left hand side, where there's a little inlet, there was a boathouse with a corrugated iron roof. Apparently when the navigation failed and the water flooded through here, it washed wherries out that were moored beneath this lock and dumped them out on the fields. This area where the mill stream meets the lock stream is probably pretty much the epicentre of my Swallows and Amazons days. My best friend, who came home each summer, his name was Adrian Durrant, and his parents still owned this old boat shed on the island. They also owned a garden house, which is probably what the house I'm looking at the far end, which has been replaced by. But there was a boathouse exactly on this site, although I don't really think it's this one. It looks very similar, but it wasn't that one. And the boat inside it was called the June Bloom. And in fact, the old summer house, if you can see it right in the very distance, it's if you look beyond the new house, behind it there's some where the cars are parked. The garage was the old summer house. Had no running water, no electricity. And then just tucked in the entrance in here, there's one of those old square flat-bottomed houseboats. It's a fantastic place to be. There's the remains of the fir tree that I burnt down. That's the one that I...
Is that one?
Yeah. That's the one that I took a tar pot up and hung it from one of the trees and one of the branches and set light to it, and then the whole tree burnt down. Oops! So, here we go. We're on our last lap. We have now come off the Aylsham Navigation when we're now onto the section leading down to Coltishall Common. This section was used a lot by commercial wherries. They reckon that up to 20 wherries would leave on a single tide. Now, you won't get any tidal influence today, but you can get a few inches on a spring tide up here. It's more pronounced after Wroxham. Journey's End, the rising sun and Coltishall Common. And so we reached the end of this third episode of Canal Hunter, looking at the Aylsham Navigation. We've arrived at Coltishall Common, site of the Rising Sun and the King's Head, two pubs within a stone's throw of each other, but they seem to get on very well. Anyhow, a little bit about Coltishall, my home village. In the 1770s, when the Aylsham Navigation was built, Coltishall was major in the malted barley industry. And in this small village there were 18 malt houses. The malt was brought down by wherry, the coal to fire the malt houses was brought up by wherry. Given the number of malt houses in this small village and its hot, sweaty work, it's probably no great surprise that there are a disproportionate number of pubs. In fact, in this small village of 900 souls, there were 9 pubs, so 1 pub for every 100 people. As well as the brewing industry, there was also the marl extraction and the limestone making. And finally, just down beyond Coltishall Common, there was Allen's Boatyard, the boatyard that built the last commercial wherry, called Ella, and it was a boatyard that turned out about 1 wherry every year. So the legacy of those bygone days here in Coltishall is the ruins of a navigation washed away in 1912, a huge number of old Maltings buildings converted into rather swish houses, and still a large number of pubs. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little mini-series looking at the Aylsham Navigation, and I think from here on we'll be getting back to the BCN and looking for those lost corners of canals that have disappeared in the more industrial, gritty areas. So, thank you for watching. I'll see you soon. Happy hunting.